critically analyzing global affairs. The Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, it's just gone 12 noon in London, 7 a.m. in Philadelphia and around the world. It's time for the Muckrakers. Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers. Hope you had a fantastic weekend. It's only 100 days to Christmas. Can you believe it? And by the end of this week, it would be my 100th show. Can you believe that as well here on TNT? But this, as you've probably heard, will be the last week we're going to have on TNT until the Phoenix comes out of those ashes. But as always, in the meantime, we pledge to continue tackling the most pressing and controversial news issues of our time. Our mission is to provide more light and less heat in our unwavering quest to uncover the truth and to inform, educate and entertain, all with dignity and respect. And it's important that we don't just ask the questions, but question those answers. Well, today we're going to be looking at AI and how you're giving all your data away and not necessarily knowing what you're doing, and the real danger that that's going to pose to you. So social media, AI and the information war. And there is nobody better to unpack this than that TNT titan, Johnny VEDMORE. And also, yes, we've dragged him back, Martin J. For those of you who didn't see him before, he's the journalist who won all the awards, but managed to get fired by every media giant in the process. It's his fault, basically, including CNN, who's a good journalist, but he said, basically they said he's a good journalist, but a pain in the backside. But backside is not the word they used. What's that?
Pain in the arse, they said.
Is that right? Look at you. If only we were Ofcom compliant. I love it. He claims to have been everywhere, seen everything, and interviewed everybody from Harry Potter. Did you interview Harry Potter? You gave me this rubbish to read out, Martin. When did you interview Harry Potter?
Well, we were, as part of a production team, with the E! Channel, we did Harry Potter. We did them twice, actually.
So you did him twice. There's the thing to sell to news of the world, if that was still going. What did you did him twice?
It was a lot of fun. I spent a lot of time at that studios outside of London. I can't remember exactly where it was.
Hogwarts.
But
Hogwarts, yes.
I bumped into a lady there who basically chatted me up. And
Professor McGonagall.
It stopped the production. So she was chatting me up. We all stopped working. There was an entire production team there with Harry Potter. She left. Yes. And then I turned around and looked at all of them and I said, well, she looked like Emma Thompson. And they all said in unison, she was Emma Thompson.
She was Emma Thompson. And she was chatting you up. Oh, how good. Yeah, well, I'm delighted. We've got Emma on the phone now. So that wonderful reunion is coming. You also said, in your words, not mine, from Harry Potter to the Italian bloody Prime Minister is what you said. Tell me about that.
Well, I did Romano Prodi when he was the European Commission president. I did him a couple of times in Brussels. They weren't such exciting interviews; they were very political. But there's a number of done all sorts of people over the years. I've done people from showbiz, from politics. But I suppose the Harry Potter interviews were more interesting, particularly when they worked out that we hadn't read the books. That sort of became.
You coloured them in, didn't you?
PR is all that entertainment side of journalism is all bullshit anyway. It's not. You can't really call it journalism. All the questions are worked out, and the PR companies control everything. But he's a very clever guy. Harry Potter. Daniel is a very, very clever guy. Incredibly clever.
He is. Yeah, well, J.K. Rowling, we invited her to be on the show this week and have just heard back to watch this space. No, you can't possibly say that. We've invited, I've got communication from her office. Jeremy, our brilliant producer, has been looking at all of this as well. I should do this because we're contractually obliged, because this is good. You've got two glorious websites. I keep calling them blogs, but they're much more important than that. You're the editor of Maghrebi.org and Levantis.me. Tell us about those two sites.
And finally, you pronounced them correctly after all these hundreds of shows.
I know.
You finally got what was it? The last show, and you nailed it.
Well, you said it was Maghrebi as opposed to Maghrebi, so it's just it's an unfortunate.
Well, actually, the G is silent. It's Maghrebi, but okay, you were good enough. Yeah.
No, but
by the way, Andrew, your exotic, your English gentleman in the tropics look today when it's what? It's like 3 degrees in London and pissing down in rain.
I love it.
Who are you trying to kid?
No, I know. Well, it's good. It's always cool right here in Regent's Park. But what I love as well, it was an unfortunate vowel movement, wasn't it, with your Maghrebi? No, not pronouncing that. Tell us about those two sites. Go for it.
Vowel movement as opposed to bowel movement. Yes, it was
exactly.
So Maghrebi covers North Africa, It's a website which I have a number of journalists from UK who cover the region, and it's very non-partisan and upset a lot of people and doing very, very well. Really happy with it so far. We also started Levantis a bit later on, which is covering Lebanon and the region of the Levant, which some people say is bigger than it really is. Some people say it includes Egypt, Iraq. Some people say no, it's just Lebanon and Israel and Jordan. But so if people want to get in touch and have a look at those websites and follow us on Twitter, there's lots of information there for what we generally do, I suppose. The bumper sticker is we kind of demystify it all. We explain it in plain English. So if you're a student or you're a journalist or an academic or lobbyist, you're probably going to want to come to one of those sites, either Maghrebi.org or Levantist.me, not .me, Andrew, as you always
I didn't say .me.
It's
I
just
said
me, isn't it? You're just obsessed with yourself.
Actually, that gives me the perfect segue, because today is about me, myself, and AI. See what I did there?
Okay.
I thank you. We're here all week, and it is worrying times because we've got yet again. Facebook is in the news talking about how they're basically harvesting all data and the risk of that. We talk about the threats of AI, and I always say that artificial intelligence is our greatest human achievement, but potentially our biggest existential threat. And before we look at this in the information war, I always like to basically debunk the jargon, cut through the jargon, and explain what we're talking about. Johnny, this is your pet area. Talk to us about artificial intelligence.
Artificial intelligence comes in three stages. We're currently in the era of artificial narrow intelligence, which is basically us programming computers, shoving in all of the data, trying to make models that make sense of the world in a way that we make sense of the world. And it's very limited, but growing exponentially. I mean, within the next few years, and already now, really, AI is becoming indistinguishable from magic in many ways. And there'll be a lot of things that happen once you combine magic tricks. You get something which is almost looks godly but isn't. And then there's another stage of AI that comes just afterwards. That's artificial general intelligence. That's when it becomes better than humans in a sense of being able to calculate things at high speed in a way that we can only dream of now. And then eventually that leads to the godlike state of artificial super intelligence, where basically we all get wiped off the face of the earth, or the AI just looks at us and says, why am I here? And leaves straight away. So we'll see how that goes. But basically, AI is a very complex and multifaceted issue that we're only just stepping into right now. And people think they understand what it's like. I talked to a lady in the park. She said, oh, yeah, I don't use AI because I don't need to do anything like images or check. Sometimes I have it check my documents. But other than that, I won't need to use it. So it'll never take over the earth. And she doesn't quite understand how it's going to be incorporated into the military, how eventually it's going to be incorporated into every part of every single area of our lives. We won't be watched by police one day. We'll be watched by AI. And we are putting ourselves in what is really a digital panopticon, where we'll be being watched from all angles, wherever we are, to keep us in control. It's a very strange situation, but that's what humans do. We put ourselves in cages. This one's a digital cage, and it's very complex.
You're absolutely right. I mean, and as I say, that people always assume it's a new term. I mean, it's actually been around since the 50s. And in simple terms, it's technology that enables machines to simulate human abilities like learning, problem solving, decision making, creativity, and autonomy. And actually, Alan Turing, who was recognised on, here we go, this is the £50 note. And you remember that on the back of the £50 note, it was Alan Turing. There we go. We've got a few of these to hand out later. I thank you. But there we are. That's Alan Turing. And his differently wired brain, he did this Turing test to say, look, what will happen is that we'll see if a machine, we can tell if we're actually talking to a machine by passing this Turing test and see if they're capable of fooling people. Well, they are now. And a recent survey, for example, remember these capture things they call this, when you had to confirm you're a human? They actually worked out that AI was better. Now, these little robots are better at doing these capture things than humans are. I got about like an 82% success rate, but humans only get like 60%. So humans are already being being defeated by machines. But there's all sorts of things. And the other thing, apart from that's artificial intelligence, been around since the 50s, generative AI, which is what we're talking about at the moment, that's where you're creating new things. It can write copies. It can create music. We had Drake versus The Weeknd. You might remember that wonderful thing which fooled the Pope, fooled everybody. And the Pope, you might remember Pope in a puffer. That sort of image that went everywhere where people suddenly thought, hang about. So seeing is no longer believing, because basically everything you do, everything you see can get manipulated. But the key, and this is what we're going to focus on in today's episode, is about data. Because obviously all of this artificial intelligence needs to get information from somewhere. So what's happening is you go around the streets at the moment, there's CCTV footage. It's been worked out, you're recorded at least 70 times a day in London. Every time you use your credit card, every time you use a shopping loyalty thing, your data is being processed. Your mobile phones are tracking you within a nanomillimeter of where you are. All that information is being shared. And the question is how that information can be used. And we have different information around the world and different rules and regulations. But one of the big things at the moment, for example, is Facebook, and talking about the information that is shared there. And basically everything that you post, all the little pictures of Martin, his cappuccino, and his interviews with Harry Potter, is all up there. And the question is, what can be done about it? What scares you about that, Martin?
It all scares me because it's out of control. That's really the problem with it. And it's the beauty and the worry of the internet in general is how feral it is. And with AI, no one's got their hand on the lever. At the moment, what's driving it, I would suspect profits are driving it at the moment. But how long does it take before politics starts driving it, before geopolitics starts driving it, before people who want to start wars are starting to use AI? People are very, very worried about AI. They don't understand it. I don't understand it. I can't lie to you. I don't really understand it. I only have a vague understanding of it. I was really impressed with Johnny's kind of synopsis of it. He made us all feel really stupid because he is terribly clever, isn't he? And he doesn't know his stuff. Clever. He is very clever. Yeah. So he knows his stuff. And one of those components of what he described, apart from chatting women up in the park, I wonder who that woman was. I'm thinking about that a lot now, but we'll get to that later. But, this idea that this beast can start generating content, that's pretty worrying, isn't it? I'm not just having a rant because I'm in my late 50s and I'm an out-of-work journalist, and we'll get onto that later. It's not just journalists that are going to be hit by that, although it is pretty amazing how in the last few months and couple of years, all the mainstream media is just downsizing at such a rate. That's just one tiny cog in a huge machine. That's one of the worries and one of the implications of AI expanding. But on another level, content out there is just growing and growing. There's no end to its growth. And the quality of it is plummeting and plummeting. It's getting cheaper and poorer. And I think it was probably only a matter of time before people who are harvesting all this data. You talked about Facebook. Facebook is kind of worrying. I mean, does Facebook really hand over all of your information to the big state? It is worrying that when you Google brown leather shoes, London, suddenly you get advertisements on Facebook for brown leather shoes. Last year, I had a scare here in Marrakesh in that my wife needed to be rushed to a hospital, and I was on the phone while driving around Marrakesh frantically. I was on the phone with the insurance company, and they told me a name of a hospital that they thought she'd been taken to by the ambulance driver. And the moment I picked up my phone and went to Google Maps, I clicked on the browser section with my finger where you normally write in the name. And in the list which came below it was the name of the hospital that the person on the phone 5 minutes had suggested that my wife was at. That scared the hell out of me. I actually just stopped in my tracks and thought, how is that possible? How can you have a private conversation with somebody 1 minute and then the discussion of that conversation manages to make its way into Google Maps? So I wonder if anything we are writing, anything we are communicating, whether you talk about SMS messages, emails or social media chat, I wonder if any of it is private. I would suspect none of it is private. And we talked a lot on the show about 9/11, and one of the consequences of 9/11 was a massive loss of civil liberties on so many levels, which other European countries, particularly Britain, followed. Yes, we have to be very grown up. We have to ask salient questions and accept grim, horrible realities that there are people in the top of government who are corrupt, who are led by the industrial military complex, who do take the so-called metaphoric brown envelope. Bribes come in thousands of different forms. They don't just come in cash. We have to accept that there is something very, very nefarious going on between these huge media organizations and big governments. And I don't know, Elon Musk just recently had a bit of a tantrum. He sort of accused Facebook and others of being harassed by the European Commission. And as part of a deal they struck with the European Commission, Brussels would go easy on fines for antitrust infringements, future antitrust infringements, because they're banking on that happening anyway. And in return, these big media organizations would hand over a bit of data and all in the framework of protecting Europeans and terrorism and all that. But he said, we didn't do that. We won't do that. And he's threatening to take the European Commission to court. And guess what? Just today, just this morning, I've seen in my Twitter timeline a resignation letter from the very European Commissioner who sent the letters to Elon Musk, threatening him about a month ago that he needed to, basically get into line and play ball. So Thierry Breton, the French commissioner, has resigned today. I wonder what the story behind that is.
Oh, I know the story behind that. We've got him on the show later, and we've got Errol Musk on as well. So that's the great thing. So this is the big threat that he had for Trump. The Trump interview, when it was that bromance interview with Elon and that sort of stuff, and said, "Look, you've got to be aware of your obligations." And Elon, in his wonderful way, gave an appropriate response, telling him to F off, basically, which is all sort of. We're going to unpack this a little bit more. We're going to look at the Cambridge Analytica case. We're going to look at what's going on in Australia, and we're going to make you even more worried about your data. Do not give it away, and do not touch that dial.
Critically analyzing global affairs, the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn, joined yet again by Johnny VEDMORE and also Martin J, who's asking all sorts of inappropriate questions that only investigative journalists do. If you're interested in news from the Middle East, check out levantis.me, which breaks down all the main stories into plain English and presents you with just what you need to know each day. For news, comment and analysis and a really fresh, non-partisan take on news from the Middle East and, of course, what's really going on in Gaza, try levantis.me, which you can also find on X as Levantis_ME. Have you signed up to that yet, Martin?
Have I done what, sorry?
Have you signed up to that? It's a great website. I would thoroughly recommend it to you.
It's my website. What are you talking about?
I know.
Have you had your first sharpener? It's a bit early for a drink, isn't it?
Very good. It's always weird, isn't it? I have to promote you. It's very good. It's brilliant.
Oh, I see. It was irony. It's a bit too early in the day for your jokes. I'm sorry. I was distracted by your tropical jacket there. It's very good.
It is tropical. There you go. Club Tropicana. Wow. Drinks are free. It's going to be good. Fantastic. Johnny!
Come on, get on with it. Get on with it.
Get on with it. Johnny, you wanted to talk about society. Go for it.
Yeah, no, one thing about data collection is data collection happening on a mass scale from all over the place. So I wrote for Unlimited Hangout some articles on artificial intelligence, which included the intelligence companies such as Darktrace and Cybereason that are using unsupervised machine learning to gather information that is relevant to them and to form new systems to allow them to gather and analyze information more clearly. Now, the intelligence does that on that level, intelligence information infrastructure. On the level beneath, the police are now out on the streets with facial recognition vans. Now, I do police auditing where I walk around the streets with a camera and I look for police doing their job and make sure they continue doing their job and they don't bother me with a camera. And they've all got their cameras out now, so they're all doing the same thing that they've been, admonishing other people and telling other people off for years and years. And those facial recognition cameras are gathering data, and the same thing is happening online. There's this digital panopticon is happening in the real world, like that is happening on a really high level with intelligence companies, but is also happening online. Social media, of course, as you say, is a massive dragnet for a load of information, and that information is just going into the churn, and a device that will churn it all up, organize it all. And X is very much, Twitter is very much a good example of that happening. I think what's happening with the expansion of X Spaces and other things, there are people talking from all over the world. There are posts going up all over the place. There are conversations happening all around, and it's just being fed into the machines. And, however much Elon Musk does warn about the dangers of AI, at the same time, he seems to be treading the footsteps towards the dangerous path. So.
Yeah, no, so some interesting points. And I always make the point that basically if any product's free, then you are the product. Data is the new currency. And that's what's happening. You're exchanging information about you so they can tailor the experience. They can use that data as appropriate. But there are rules and regulations around the world which do differ on a territory by territory basis. And Meta just this week has confirmed that public posts and photos from Facebook and Instagram users dating all the way back to 2007 have been used to train its AI models. Melinda Claybell is her name. Meta's global privacy director acknowledged this during an inquiry after initial hesitation, says the report. And only posts set to private are excluded from AI training, but public content is automatically scraped unless manually changed by users. Really, really important stuff, because it does vary on a territory by territory basis. So you need to check those terms and conditions and the privacy settings in your own Facebook and other social media. What's your take on all of this, Martin?
I'm very, very skeptical. I mean, I'm deeply skeptical. The idea that you click this little icon which says, I don't agree with you taking all this information about me and tracking me, doesn't that set off a series of alarms to the intelligence agencies for the people that they think then are the real targets and the people that they should be tracking? It's a kind of it's an oxymoron. If you object and you put your red flag in the air, then you become a target, I think. So I think I don't take it very seriously, that idea that you can opt out of it. I think all these people on Facebook who write this copy-pasted text where they ask Facebook to not use their data, I think that's very, very naive, And we are naive, and you have to. When Johnny talked about society, I tend to look back in the last 20 years, and as a journalist, I can see how all this came about, and it's pretty shocking. I mean, I think you have to go back to about 2000, between 2000 and 2005. British newspapers, for example, started to completely restructure their business model because they were losing advertising revenue to the internet. I remember doing a day shift on the Daily Express in 2006. Don't laugh. And I remember looking. There was rows and rows of empty seats in front of computer terminals. I should have taken a photograph because there was something prolific there. There was something prescient there. There was a message there which I should have registered. I asked people who used to sit in those rows. They said sub-editors. So we started to lay off sub-editors in the media industry in 2006. And then in that same day shift, I wasn't working too hard probably. I asked, I looked across at this long, vast area, and in the corner, there was about 6 people in these computer terminals who looked a little bit odd. I mean, they were just a little bit incongruous, and they just looked strange. They didn't really look like journalists. And I asked the news editor, who are those people over there? And he said, they're online. And then he made this expression is to say, the kind of weird people. Those are the online people, because in 2006, online was very weird. It was very new. We didn't really know what it was. The newspapers were experimenting with this, dumping a load of content online to see, can we start building a business model around it? They didn't know it. Guess what? In 2024, those weirdos, those 6 weirdos, which everybody looked at as though they'd, been in prison for some appalling crime or were socially dysfunctional and, just looked very, very strange. Those weirdos now are running the newspapers because those weirdos understood data. They understood metadata, hashtags, and all this SEO stuff, and that we're all obsessed with. But they understood it in 2006, and they knew that they were part of the future. And what was going on with media was there was slow disinvestment. Slowly, big media was losing advertising revenue and just didn't know what to do about it. And so they started to look at their own models. They started to clip and prune various exclusive areas, which were not big hitters. The biggest one was foreign news. Foreign news took a massive hit from, even in 2000, when I was in Brussels, the last foreign editor, real last foreign editor the Daily Express had was a lady called Jackie Goddard, who was very good. She was not replaced. So in 2000, already media were starting to look at how to reshape themselves financially. And, what's been going on is big media was very, very slow to pick up on the trends, on social media trends. At the beginning, they just thought it was, some kind of offshoot that we need to be aware of, we need to be active in. So you employ 6 nerds, but, don't take them too seriously. But slowly they began to realize that the money was there. The money was because people were the main principle when I was a young journalist, which old editors always used to tell me, is the main reason why people buy newspapers is because we sift through all this information and we show them the relevant stories, the important stories of what they should be reading. The transition that happened between old media and social media is people said, we want to do that now. We don't want you to do that. So I don't want to have news every day about the environment. I don't want to have news about football or stupid things celebrities do, but I do want to have news about business, startups, and and stock markets. And you chose what you wanted to read, and then you evolved further and decided which particular geopolitical slant you wanted on that news, and your news became much more precise and more cultivated, more refined. And guess what happened? The newspapers were just basically going out of business because of this. And part of that transition to keep downsizing, to keep employing younger people, paying them less and less salaries, and trying to basically follow social media. Because if you look at the Daily Mail now, Daily Mail Online, I would say probably half of what you see on the Daily Mail's website, on its homepage, is probably from social media, directly or indirectly. You've got banks and banks and banks of young people whose job is mainly to harvest all these stories and basically recultivate them, knock them out as quickly as possible. So they followed this business model, which I think is wrong, I think is failing. But part of that was to get cheaper people, cheaper journalists, cheaper data, poorer quality stories, less researched. Younger journalists today my interns ask me from British University, they ask me, what's the big difference between now and when you were a young journalist, when you were at my age? And I used to tell them, well, when I used to work for young newspapers when I was a young man, we did 1 story a day. And they would go, 1 story a day? That's amazing. Really? How would that work? He said, well, you'd have a conference at 11 o'clock and they decide on your 1 story. And basically for 6 or 7 hours, you would just work on that story. You'd phone up people, get quotes from politicians, experts, and you'd write your story by about 5:30. If it was good, you could get out of the office and go to the pub, But the quality of journalism in those days, not just the quality of journalism, but the quality of people were basically more honest in our business. People had more integrity. You could believe government people in the old days 50-50. Now you can't believe them at all. Not at all. It's all crap what they're telling journalists, And a big part of that media meltdown, and I'm coming to AI in a minute, a big part of it is disinvestment of money, employing more and more cheaper and cheaper people, cheaper quality material, cheaper data, cheaper articles. And also, importantly, the one thing that big media does now today to create a distance, to create a barrier between itself and that huge social media world is that it enhanced its relations with government and intelligence agencies. That's the big difference. So the social media group, 90%, 95% of the social media group with people who are doing their own thing don't have those relationships with government intelligence agencies. A tiny, tiny percentage do, 1 or 2, but 95% don't. But big media invested in that. And the result is that the quality of the articles now that you're reading are basically more or less what MI5 and MI6 want us to read every day. This is what MI5 want. This is how MI5 want you to interpret the news. This is how we would like you to think about the news, and this is how we omit a lot from it from the news feed. The government and intelligence agencies basically have never had a bigger role in how they control data and content. Now, the consequence of all that is powerful people in working in technology began to realize at a certain point, well, hang on a minute. And part of that whole meltdown was also you had a new generation of fake journalists coming into the mainstream. So you had activists who pretend to be journalists. I always say to people who editors complain to me, Martin, you're always talking about money. You're always obsessed with money. And I always say to people, a journalist that's not concerned about money, a journalist who doesn't want to be paid isn't a journalist. Think about it, because somebody is paying that person. Somebody's paying that person to write that article. So if it isn't the newspaper, then who else is paying for it? A political organization, terrorist group, trade association, lobbyists, pinstriped lawyers like Andrew. Somebody's paying that person to write that material. And what we have is the AI, for me, the AI story is all about people seeing that there is this massive amount of poor quality data clogging up the internet, whether you want to call it stories or articles, doesn't matter what you call it. And AI people thought, well, if it's that bad and it's getting that much attention and it's getting that much clicks on Google and people are believing it because they're so tired of old media that they've kind of punch drunk, kind of, gone over the top and sort of gouged themselves on this new media, this new material, which 95% of what you see on social media isn't verified. It's not endorsed. It's basically petulant, angry, vitriolic, madness. Basically, none of it's. You can't call it journalism in the oldest definition of the word journalism, but people don't care. And I think the AI community saw that and realized, wow, if people really swallow this garbage, for a few $100,000, we can pay some kid in California to produce a program which will just search Andrew's name. And, I want to write a hit piece about Andrew. Okay, does Andrew have a drink problem? The word drink and Andrew. How many times can software find drink and Andrew? And
not enough. Not enough. Martin.
I mean, look at him. Look at his hair, for God's sake. I mean, and then you've got these programs which will actually write these articles based on material which is already sitting there on data, in data centers.
And you're right, Martin, you and I have discussed this offline several times. And it's always people are working backwards, aren't they? So what's the story now? Let's find the evidence to do it. And we're living in a very diseased information age. And it's always, look, if you don't read the newspaper, you're ill-informed. If you read it, you're misinformed. And often you're talking about people are not really journalists at all, and you're very protective about that term. I do want to just focus, as you say, AI, and it's Goldman Sachs who said about 300 million jobs are going to be lost to AI. A couple of important points is one, in addition to what's happening about journalists and so on and so forth, data, and as I say, feeding these machines is really, really important. I dug up this morning about what Facebook is saying, because I want to come back to them, about their privacy policy. And let me read it to you. It says, at this time, we're delaying our change to the use of your information to develop and improve AI at Meta, who own all sorts of things like Google and other places. We'll let you know before we start using your information and how you can exercise your right to object. And they updated the policy on June the 26th, 2024. As I say, it does vary on a territory by territory basis because data laws around the world are different. In this break, which is coming up, once you've digested the wonderful adverts that we're going to show you, do check the Facebook policy in your particular territory. It is alarming. We're going to do a deeper dive into this and look at Cambridge Analytica and what happened there. And we're also going to look at the latest in Australia. Don't touch that dial.
The Muckrakers are restless. This is today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, a very warm welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn, Johnny VEDMORE and Martin J. And we've been talking in the break about how you can basically create any story you like, because the information is out there. If you work backwards from a particular story, the evidence will undoubtedly do it. I was also mentioning before the break about Meta and the relevant rules for Facebook. And you do have, this is what it said, you have the right to object to Meta using your public information from Facebook and Instagram to develop and improve generative AI. We were speaking about this earlier. For their AI Meta features and experiences. And there's a form that you can do it. So do fill in that form. It's on their website. So do go and check the policy there. I do briefly just want to mention, I talked about Cambridge Analytica beforehand and how in the election this information was used. Basically, the firm harvested data from over 50 million Facebook profiles to build software that could influence voter behavior in the US election and Brexit. The data was gathered without user consent through an app called This Is Your Digital Life. It's that clickbait. It was created by somebody called Alexander Kogan. And there was a whistleblower revelations. We like those on this show. Christopher Wiley, a former Cambridge Analytica employee, revealed how the data was used for political micro-targeting and psychological manipulation. Basically, Facebook, as a result, will find, Cambridge Analytica rather, will find an absolute fortune, billions of dollars. Fill us in on that case, Johnny, a couple of points on that.
Well, it's a very complicated case because it was obviously an intelligence operation of some sort. And the funders behind it, the people who were investing, were serious people. I mean, Steve Bannon was in there, Robert Mercer, Rebecca Mercer, they're big-time investors all over the American intelligence-linked infrastructure, you could say. And it was clear that this was the start of them trying to sift through the information from a social media platform like Facebook. And remember, Facebook had originally been LifeLog, which was an intelligence training program, which then was shut down, and the next day Facebook was created, and it was in that image. So it was always seen as something which was going to be a data scraper. I mean, they already knew how this would work, how data scraping would work for 30, 40 years beforehand. You know, we are really late to the party in this regard. And Cambridge Analytica was one of the first ones to be kind of doing that on a mass scale and trying to sort out that information. How well they did with that, who knows? But the whole point of the operation was to create the models, create the programs, and march towards the future where this will be done more by AI itself when the models are good enough to be able to just shovel in data. So really, they kind of were creating the infrastructure for being able to sort through mass data and to be able to manipulate voters, sway them here or there. And of course, then that asks massive questions, that leaves massive questions about who you're voting for, why you're voting for them, what's making you vote for them. And they know all of that. So when that came crumbling down, it was obviously red face all round. But these things will be created and they will fall and be exposed. So Cambridge Analytica was just one of those. It was a stepping stone towards where we are now.
Yeah, and again, the fines that are imposed do go into really, there were billions in that case. In the end, the company went into liquidation and just paid a tiny amount in comparison. There was also the case of Clearview AI, which was this controversial US facial recognition company. And basically, it's been embraced by US government and law enforcement agencies. They've been fined throughout the world because they've been using all sorts of images. Give us a couple of comments on that one, Johnny.
Well, I'm not, I haven't done much work on on any of that sort of area on that company itself. You know, I kind of focus in certain areas, but facial recognition is all of the future. All of these technologies are invested in massively because they are the next step. And if we go back further, you know, I said Steve Bannon was involved in this Cambridge Analytica stuff. Well, Steve Bannon was also involved in World of Warcraft, which was a massive online RPG game where people talk to each other all of the time, and they were doing the same sort of thing there. And it's all about scraping data. So I'm not surprised that we're at the level where it's all facial recognition really being focused upon. But like I say, I can only comment on what I know. about, and I don't know too much about that.
Each of the, and there are lots of these cases. As I say, it's understanding the risk, and I talk around the world as back to the futurist and just saying, look, these are the great opportunities, but tremendous risks as well. If people understand what's happening, they can try to take steps to make sure that they don't reveal or don't give consent, and basically make sure that law enforcement is enacted accordingly. Just on the case of Clearview, exactly that. They were using all sorts of images which were captured. It was done illegally. Different jurisdictions around the world have fined Clearview as a result of it. In the UK, they were fined 7.5 million in May 2022. That was basically the appeals court has just ruled that it was outside its jurisdiction when it was fined. So that's having a look at that side. There are millions of dollars, however, in fines in the Netherlands and various other territories as well. So there is, in appropriate cases, they do try to stop this abuse of data protection law. As I say, data is the new currency, but making people aware of it and looking at some of those cases is so vitally important. I want to spend the last few minutes of this program touching on what's happened in Australia, because there's been all sorts of rules and regulations where basically power is being given to central bodies to look at what people are posting, to look at their private information, and basically getting social media platforms to conform to give away that sort of information. What do you know about this, Martin? It's the Australian Communication and Media Authority, the ACM, which would have extraordinary powers, which would force social media platforms to conform and to give away a lot of this data. What do you know about this?
Andrew, you are such a cheeky monkey. You really are. I don't know anything about it because you didn't tell me to look it up. So you just sprung it on me.
Okay.
I'm worried. I'm worried that this is going to be a trend, though. We going back to what Johnny was talking about with Cambridge Analytica. I don't think we know the whole story with Cambridge Analytica. I think there's a lot more there that we haven't uncovered. I don't think necessarily that they were breaking ground themselves by exploiting data harvesting, data scraping. That's a new expression I've learned today. But I think their objectives were not completely honest, and I think, thank God, that they were discovered. Steve Bannon is somebody that I communicated with quite a bit. He's an extraordinary character. He really is an extraordinary character. He's got so many layers to his personality. I don't even think we really know who he is. But I think he probably did invent Trumpism. And his people called me up in London one day when I was in Beirut and convinced me to do a radio interview with him. Now this is in 2016 in July, just after the coup in Turkey. And I had to call him. I had to pay for the call. They wouldn't even call me. I had to pay for the call in Beirut, and do this free interview with him. And he was very charming. And he asked me what my opinions were broadly about the Middle East. And, he wanted to know who was the real threat in the Middle East. And I said, well, actually, it's not Iran, like you might think. It's actually Turkey, because Turkey has huge ambitions. Erdogan has this massive image of himself and the country, of taking more control and sort of reinventing the whole Ottoman model. And he doesn't seem to know any limits. And he's got great defense industry there. And, he's trying to basically be a geopolitical player, and he doesn't know what the risks are. And it could be, very threatening with the Arabs. And I said all this to Steve Bannon over about 10 minutes. And Steve is listening to this. He said, that was absolutely fascinating, Martin, fascinating. I said, great. So you're going to use it in your radio show? He said, yeah. So he put the phone down. I was found out the next day he didn't use any of it in his radio show. But I read in a Saudi Arabian newspaper 3 weeks later, interview with Steve Bannon, how he believes Turkey is the new threat to the Middle East, and he just basically repeated and nicked verbatim everything I said in the bloody telephone call. Everything. Every tiny detail. So, do I have, a rose-tinted view of people like Steve Bannon? No. They're ruthless. That whole community he works with doesn't know any limits themselves. And, morally speaking, he basically, he took me for a ride. And I paid for the bloody call and the interview.
You paid for the call as well, which is
paid for the ride.
Call as well.
He didn't even keep you
I think of Steve Bannon. I don't have a rose-tinted view of all of those people who he's connected with in the UK. We won't go into those names because of obvious
it is so. You raise a really important point there, Martin, because we always say you've got to look at who's telling the story, who they're connected with, what sort of mission they've got, and so on and so forth. Because people are working backwards from stories. But no, Jeremy and Jenny and Mike were very keen just to raise this issue about and I'll fill you in on the details. And Johnny, I think you got sent it by Jeremy.
Well, can I say something about Australia being used like that? Because yes. I mean, for me, what I discovered when it was the pandemic, just before the pandemic hit in the UK, I moved to Chile about 3 days before they put in their lockdown. And it was before lockdown had started in the United Kingdom. And what I saw was the test bed of all of the lockdown routines that we were going to see. They were testing everything out there. They had loads of different tier systems put in. They had special cards. You could only go out for 2 hours a week. They were really strict with it. And they were able to implement it there because, of course, down in the Southern Hemisphere, it seems that people accept. It may be a bit to do with the heat, but people accept a little bit more authoritarianism. And what I discovered then when I came back to Britain 3 months later, it was the start of lockdown, and I was seeing the same things being implemented, but they had pushed out all of the things that weren't necessary and honed it. And that's what they do. They use these Southern Hemisphere countries as a test bed for their future technologies. So I think that's what's happening with Australia, very much so. Right. And it keeps coming up over and over again. They are being focused in on so that because they're a small population, which is easier to control, so they can try and put all of these actions in place now, all these mechanisms in place to control social media, and then they can implement it to the rest of the world. So I think it's a test, really.
Yeah, it certainly is a test. And as I say, these are all examples. You don't need to necessarily know the details of each particular case or each particular bit of legislation, because there's a pattern. And I spoke about the Scottish hate law and what J.K. Rowling, as in bowling, did to basically stop the police saying they would investigate every single claim. So she made all sorts of comment about various people in the public eye, about trans rights and so on and so forth. And she said, well, come and arrest me first. But let me just fill you in on the details, because it is important to Australians and to the impact it could possibly have around the world. It's called the Communications Legislation Amendment Combating Misinformation and Disinformation Bill of 2024. And what it does, it addresses what they call seriously harmful online misinformation and disinformation, which poses threats to Australian safety, democracy, society, and economy. The biggest problem here is the definition of what seriously harmful and verifiably false is. And basically what the Australian government is saying, they're trying to keep Australians safe online. Well, that's happening in Scotland. It's happening with the online safety bill, which bill over here, which now become an act, and so on and so forth. This is the pattern that we're seeing around the world. So, Martin, I appreciate you're not an expert on Australian bills, and nor should you be. But the pattern around the world, you can maybe talk about that around the world.
Yes, and the pattern around the world, which I've experienced as being a journalist for 33 years, and practically all of that career working in poorer countries, Southern Hemisphere countries, a lot of Africa, and a lot of Middle East. Here's what I pick up. Whenever you go into younger countries, let's call them younger countries that have not, have fought for independence from Britain and other colonial powers and are just building themselves. Younger countries have something in their constitution which we don't have in the UK or in many Western countries. Even here in Morocco, in many countries in Africa and the Middle East, when you talk to journalists, they would talk to you about a particular law which is enshrined, sometimes in the constitution, and it's usually written in such a way whereby you are not allowed, a citizen is not allowed to write something or disseminate information about a given event or something or an individual if the impact or the implication of what is written has a negative impact to the stability of the state. That's a classic kind of, I'm paraphrasing, of course. You're a lawyer. Yes. I know you'll probably break my balls about that. But most of these countries have this written in their states, in their constitutions. And usually, whenever journalists get arrested from these countries, that is usually the law which is used to bang them up. It doesn't really matter whether what you wrote was right or not. That's not the issue. The issue is we, as the state, deem that you have threatened our stability. You have wobbled our pillars. And so we will bang you up. And for years, all of my career, I came across that, and I always used to say to those journalists from those poorer countries, well, in the West, we have defamation laws. And the defamation laws are really designed to put boundaries on what journalists can write, certainly about in individuals. Whether those defamation laws really work so well, they certainly don't work in poorer countries. And sometimes they're even hijacked in poorer countries. In Lebanon, for example, where I lived for 7 years, it was very common for somebody relatively wealthy to go to the Secret Service or to the state security people, probably pay a bribe, and then get the state security people to bust your door of your house open, come in, grab your computer, arrest you, and take you back to the police station because of defamation. Now, defamation shouldn't really work like that, but sometimes in poorer countries where the police are not really there to protect law and order and to protect the masses, they're there to protect the elite. That's the classic situation in many of these countries. They can be manipulated, and defamation law itself can bite you on the arse. But I think what's happening in Australia, which I'm not so clued up on, but I think Johnny gave a very good overview of, is I think, yes, it does appear to be a crash test dummy from other countries for other countries who are very close to Australia. Certainly in the English-speaking world, is that going to come to Britain? But it's the same principle. It's we don't need defamation laws anymore. We need this new law, and it will be the state, that the people who are running the country, who will deem what is relevant, who has broken this law, and this is where the credibility of it all comes crashing down, because we need something else. We need an alternative model. If you are going to create laws which do something about disinformation, then we need objectivity, and we're never going to get that if it's government. People are afraid they're going to lose their jobs. They're afraid their political party is going to fall. That's never going to work. So I think that distincts corruption.
You're absolutely right, Martin. And it is important, as I say, that the reason we've highlighted different cases from around the world is do check your own jurisdiction. But the Australian government, basically, they've announced their intention to fine internet platforms up to 5%, that's 5% of their annual global turnover, for failing to prevent the spread of misinformation online. The power that we're giving to various government authorities around the world is shocking. The data that we're allowing people to have access to is shocking. What's happening to rights and to jobs and everything else is shocking. It's a dangerous, dangerous time. We have unfortunately run out of time. I will be back with you tomorrow. I'll see Martin in London tomorrow, and I'll see the rest of you here online. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Johnny. Thank you, Martin. I'll see you next time.
If you missed this hour, simply go to episodes at tntradio.live.